Hello and welcome to another episode of the Silk and Steel podcast. I'm your host, Carl Za. Today we have a very special guest, Diego, all the way from Caracas, Venezuela. As many people know, right now, U.S. is carrying out serious military aggression against Venezuela. So I invited Diego Seguera to come to tell us what the situation is on the ground. But first, for my audience, Diego, would you do a brief intro of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Carl, and thank you for this. Well, I'm a journalist. I'm a writer and a researcher for, especially and mostly focused on Misión Verdad outlet, which can translate roughly into Truth Mission. We don't do actual news coverage. We're more focused on analysis and processing many stuff and go as deep as we can regarding the successive junctures we've been going through since, I don't know, Misión Verdad has 12 years already online. And so we've seen a lot from our perspective on what's going on the ground in Venezuela, but also for Venezuelan and Latin America or Spanish-speaking people in general, analysis and research for bringing subjects that are not that usual in Spanish. Different settings, different ideological trends and traditions, and so forth, even to an academic level. But of course, now it's more Polonized, but basically that's what we do, and that's basically what I've been doing all these years. And I've been doing also the rounds recently in several interviews. We've coincided in one of them, of course, and yeah, I mean that's basically what we do. I mean we cover as much as we can and to decode as much as we can as well, which is pretty common in Chavismo. I'm also I support the government. I'm not a government official. And we're in a very complex situation, which it's also very rich in how many things are, just coming through that maybe don't even belong to the Venezuelan situation, but go wider, So that's it, basically.
Yeah, so right now, obviously, Trump administration has really cranked up the military pressure on Venezuela up to the 11. I want to ask you, what is your take on this current situation? Why do you think Trump administration choose at this particular moment to carry out its aggression against Venezuela? Of course, we know U.S. always had a hate boner for Venezuela ever since Chavez came to power. This is nothing new. But why the
ramping up?
Tremendous military? Yeah, why they're ramping up right now?
It's funny. I remember when we shared like a panel at this Iran talk interview, because it was early. There was clearly the early stages of this, and regardless of the buildup and also the clearly kinetic extrajudicial action, many of the things we talked about, regardless that we didn't, I think neither of us expected to escalate this in this way. We knew it was going to escalate in some way, but not this one, maybe. The main reasons we talked about back then, I think they still stand. And we're talking about, I think this combo was like 2 months ago, sorry. And so it has a lot to do and there are several layers here. Of course, regarding Venezuela and regarding the obvious reason, which is basically summed up because of Venezuelan resources, because of the political stand it has already for a quarter of a century, a bit more, and for its geography and a lot of reasons. And also but you also got like their own context, what's going on in the States, and what also has been happening globally. I mean, there's an interrelation between all these factors, like in a very clear way, I think. And like I said, it stands on what they're doing now. It really resembles, and it hasn't changed but deepened, I guess, from 2 months from now, which is power projecting, forcing, shaping up the psychological elements of this in order to force an easier way out of this. And Also, well, I think neither of us actually ruled out they could go bonkers in any direction, which is also quite a feat these days. So that also it's also manifesting itself here especially through of course, I think it's not on the kinetic level, but on the think tank, political speech, discourse level. I think it's insane also. What it shows, it's insane. And that's what the main reason. Yeah.
I remember, so during our talk on Iran talks 2 months ago, at that time, I was looking at this and I thought, okay, well, this is obviously a bluff, because at that time, U.S. only pivoted about 4,000 military personnel into a region. And looking at the numbers, 4,000 military personnel is not going to do, it's not going to move any needle. So at that time, my assessment was this was a pure intimidation tactic by Trump to apply pressure on government of Venezuela, and in hope of create some crack and fissure in the Venezuelan society, so they can inspire some kind of color revolution or regime change. Essentially they do regime change on the cheap. But I didn't think 4,000 military personnel was enough to to carry out a serious ground invasion. But now they have pivoted significantly more military asset. They're saying they're gonna another aircraft carrier attack group is on the way from Europe. And
they say that the Gerald Ford is already on the Southern Command area of responsibility. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they say already.
Right, and then they have significantly increased naval and air assets all around the bases in the Caribbean. So do you, at the time when we talk on Iran talk, you agree with my assessment, but today would you have a different assessment on the current situation? Do you think that still holds? Okay.
Certainly, I think it does hold, but it now has a very large extra element to it, which is the military factor, the way we're seeing it right now. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, back then they didn't kill anyone yet either.
Yeah.
Which is another factor that also, of course, changed everything: the tone, the rhetoric, the implications, the possible consequences, and so forth. And yes, even although I think they still are looking for a regime change on the cheap. They're putting themselves in a situation that they could go further. I think it also depends from where you see it, and also what's going on right now. As in, maybe, I think we also talked about it back then, Trump could, for example, find a halfway more satisfactory outcome for this without going full, without running amok or further than they already have. But Rubio is something different. So I think it also depends on how any of these visions prevails, and in order to see how far they're going to go. It's funny that we have already close to 10 minutes of conversation, and the discussion about if the drug thing is true or not, it's not even a discussion. It's not a subject here. It's not a discussion.
That's bogus. We all know that's bogus. Trump mentioning about fentanyl. We know that fentanyl is not coming out of Venezuela, first of all, and now they're actually expanding the whole now they're aiming the rhetoric not only toward Venezuela but also Colombia. That actually caught me by surprise a little bit, because Colombia traditionally have been the strongest U.S. ally in the region, and basically Colombia was playing the role of U.S. proxy, and many times against Venezuela. So why are they
Colombia? Yes,
Colombia as well.
Well, you can still ask the question if it's actually Colombia they're thinking of, or their president Gustavo Petro and the Petro government. I mean, regardless of the analysis they could make, and they still have huge amount of assets and agreements and binding legal stuff on trade, and in a lot of ways and means of pressure. So I think it's far more clear in the Colombian case. I don't know regarding the Colombian military, for example, how they would react if the pressure gets even further. because also there are different reactions now to this, maybe even unexpected, regarding the support or rejection or silence on other Latin American quarters regarding what's going on, other than the usual vocals one. But I think it has to do with that. And also Colombia and Venezuela are basically historically almost the same thing. We're like twins, in a way, ever since the start. So that also, this kind of things, of course, also get ingrained. And you can also think of some neocon planning here as a wider theater of operations, like AFPAC, that kind of juncture between the kind of merging of territory between operational areas of interest, if you may. So I think it's twofold in that sense, because Petro's politically, it's far more vulnerable than President Maduro is. And you have 7 official declared military bases in Colombia and 2 more that are undeclared, and who knows how many smaller stations and lily pads and whatnot specifically on Colombia. And let's not talk about Panama and Peru and the Amazon, and close to Brazil also, in Guyana. So it's part of the empire of bases, of course. So I think it's not as hard as it would be here in thinking of a very ham-fisted regime change scenario. But that also tells you what they're actually thinking of, and also how this expansion actually is becoming a Caribbean situation. Of course, Venezuela is the flashpoint, but from the 60 plus murdered fishermen, seamen, smugglers of whatever, we don't know, basically. And in regards if we knew or not, it's still an extrajudicial killing. Many are Colombians, and also recently, most of the operations are actually on the Eastern Caribbean, on the Colombian Pacific coast, not only in Venezuela. And also you have also Trinidadians who have also died in these strikes, and all these 60-something strikes so far. So that also tells you 2 things. It tells you that this is actually bigger than Venezuela, and also it also tells you that this is also about it doesn't matter who it is, it doesn't matter where these people hail from. So it's also, it's heavily regional in that sense. But at the same time, this is where I think the deeper element comes. If you pair this with what's going on in Argentina or Guyana, or the countries that are actually being insanely spoiled, and quote unquote, or groomed, or honeypotted into the actual debt traps and so on and so forth, it's a regional thing. The reshaping. It's wider than we're actually seeing it.
So you think this is a grander Neo-Monroe doctrine they're trying to imposing on the rest of the Latin America? This is
Yes.
just a part of that. And one of the stated reason for U.S. government for the current military action is that they're saying they're counter Chinese and Russian influence. Now, do you buy that? Do you think that is one of their reason for doing this?
Absolutely. In the sense of the kind of engagement that countries like Venezuela has currently, geographically it opens. Sorry, but that I digress. But in a sense, there's not one country in Latin America that doesn't have a strong trade relationship with China, except for Paraguay, which still recognizes Taiwan, and maybe some Caribbean islands as well. But other than that, even Argentina itself, it's not unable to decouple from China in this context. But yes, and the thing about Venezuela, if we compare with these other countries, it's more about the nature of engagement and of course that's on the geopolitical level, but also the way it comes and how it's not a liberal conventional pro-US government that's doing this. That's the other problem they have here. And before sanctions, it proved to be a very successful, to an extent, model in order to bring a good example, to be a good neighbor in a different way, and to also uphold the livelihood of people. And those are nice stuff. And also, and if this also involves the help of China, Russia, Iran, and other players, but these are the big players. Of course, it's a bigger problem because it's gonna estrange even more the U.S. in this case, the U.S. Venezuela relationship, but also the U.S. Latin American relationship. And they're also now all about reshoring, about re-hemisphering is the word the Project 2025 uses to explain what they're doing, as in, Monroe Doctrine, to the extent that this is not, this is even America from the Americans. It goes further in that sense because they need a Lebensraum in order to be able to cope with the Asian century, a very rich and resources Lebensraum.
What now I'm curious, what is the extent of China's involvement in Venezuela? I mean, is China investing in the Venezuelan oil industry, or somehow investing in Venezuelan economy in some way? I mean, why are they so afraid of the Chinese influence?
Well, you have, Chinese are engaged in several levels. I mean, from high quality made in China 2025 stuff. I mean, thinking about what they can actually bring over to outside of China, from vehicles to appliances to oil purchasing. It's very wide. It's very comprehensive. So as far as it gets, I'm not into numbers right now, and it's, as far as I know, it's still second regarding Brazil in that sense, or very close to being, with the highest level of engagement, economically speaking, and on trade. And also, but you have to keep in mind that also it involves as far as sanctions are actually involved. I mean, in the sense, there are some things that I guess for example, the oil purchasing is one of them, or the way they imported. But I mean, it's very wide regarding, but it has its limitations.
So sorry to interrupt you, but because you brought about the oil sanction, because the U.S. oil sanction on Venezuela is actually interesting, because it sounds like a white blanket ban on sanction on any export of Venezuelan oil, except ExxonMobil receive a waiver, so they can continue to export. Chevron, sorry. Yeah. Chevron, they receive a waiver so they can continue to export Venezuelan crude to United States to send to the U.S. refineries. So it sounds more like the policy is really no oil for China, but oil should come. Venezuelan oil should continue to flow to the U.S. That's what it looks like in practice.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it has to do that's the message it sends there. I mean, but of course there are other players and agreements from other countries. Some have been thwarted given the context. For example, with the shared oil gas fields with Trinidad, to give you an important example, a recent one that sadly has been also undermined because of the whole situation, which was actually a very key model of cooperation regarding energy. But and yes, the Chevron case is quite interesting because it adds an extra layer of complexity to the whole dynamic in several ways. First, Chevron has been engaged in Venezuela for 100 years, at least. At least not. I mean, for 100 years, which is enough. Exxon, on the other hand, left Venezuela in 2007 because they didn't accept the terms now of the shares and the way that Venezuela was rewriting the contracts with all the oil companies, with a 51% share for Venezuela. And they didn't agree with that. So they left and they have sued Venezuela afterwards. And they also are the main drive on the exploitation of offshore oil and in the disputed waters between Venezuela and Guyana currently. But at the same time, Chevron also, which has its waivers and tries to honor their contracts, and it's going through what a friend called sometimes the paperwork sanctions. It's also close to Trump. I mean, they were the ones who actually paid for the inauguration party or something, or the act, So that's also a different layer of all this. And also Rubio's very close to ExxonMobil, Marco Rubio. So this also set up, another contradictory element to a very messy relationship between politics / ideology and energy market stability. Because there was 2 weeks ago, there was this Friday, I don't know if it was, psychological shaping, creating the atmosphere, but a lot of movement was going on, and you could, in hindsight, I thought maybe that last Friday something could have happened, and it didn't. But and it's not clear yet for me. I mean, it's not hard proof other than the usual speculation and spinning that, but it was possible, but it wasn't. That kind of atmosphere, which is intense, and but it seems that per Bloomberg, the WTI at that moment, just because of the uncertainty, was just surging its price. So this also could adds up another layer of contradictions and conflict inside that also could explain the relationship between views and also the why maybe nothing has happened yet. What are they waiting for if they're going to actually do something with the military aspect of this situation?
Right. I mean, it's what you describe about the relationship between Chevron and the White House and Marco Rubio. This actually makes perfect sense in American context, because American politics has always been paid to play, and we have the best politician that money can buy. So that actually was perfectly understandable. So sorry I interrupted you before.
No, please go on. I can drift away, so don't worry. It's good that you do that.
Right, because so right now, what do you think countries like China, Russia, and Iran can assist Venezuela in the face of U.S. aggression currently?
I think it depends on it's a case by case thing. There's no other than the most general overall diplomatic multilateral approach, which is, of course, it's common among all of these countries, be it China, Russia, and Iran. But yes, there are different levels of engagement and also areas. I think. I mean, China has a very different and very cautious way to deal with this kind of things because of how counterproductive can is and how much of part of it to say this trap this could be. So it's quite risk averse of this kind of things, but they still support politically, diplomatically, and commercially. So they're not, and I don't think that's going to stop, and it could probably intensify, which is also an interesting trend you can see right now, be it with foreign friends, partners, or be it inside Venezuela, what they're doing, what the government is doing, facing the current juncture. So that's China. I personally wouldn't expect more than they actually are doing right now, but they're going to be persistent, and maybe I don't know, they can tone it up. Maybe they can depends on where this goes. And I can't predict China's behavior, but given precedents, it's what makes more sense. Russia, it's different. I think they're more proactive in that sense, and they have been also very important assistance in technical military field, the technical military field in various areas, and also in military trade. So, and there have been a lot of joint exercises and so forth, and a lot of security cooperation. So that also, I don't know how the full extent, but I do know it's more intensive in that sense. They're more easily involved in that kind of thing. But I don't think either. This is a country that won't, which is also something that many, have got this question several times. If they're going to go to the field, of course, I think it's pretty hard. I don't think so they would do. And same for the Iranians also. I mean, neither of the three, I think, are going to have like a very strong kinetic action on an official level. At least, Iran has, for me, I think it's the most engaged of the three for their own reasons and the nature of the relationship with Venezuela, especially facing sanctions and that kind of, how the tactics and how to curtail them and how to work around them and that kind of thing, the kind of stuff, and also advising. But once again, also there's military equipment, but I don't see an actual scenario in which on a state level something of this sort happens. But that's also enough. I mean, also, why are they going to get involved if the country is not able to defend itself in any given situation? That's also another element, of course. And that's important, Carl, because I think there's the Syrian 2024 fetish. It's also part of the equation, as in their own crazy domino theory. They're just betting on this. It will also happen to Venezuela, and to some extent, that analysis is correct in the sense that they have been applied the same means of pressure, regardless if it with economic or covert or whatever. I mean, it's quite similar, the ways that they have been. Also institutional, the way they have been twisted and forcing our own institutions to break. I mean, our own branches of even our branches of government. So there are a lot of similarities, but that gets to a point. It's not the same, and you can't just like, think it's going to happen exactly the same way. But on principle, it's correct. As in, maximum pressure brings collapse, and collapse will bring some sort of political takeover. But it's not the same case, and I think there are a lot of bad calculations going on. I think there are a lot of problems with the analytical process of all this. There's a recent piece by the CSIS regarding, they've been following it quite intensely. Of course, it's paid by Exxon, so the main takeaway it's going to be possible. It's going to be cakewalk if you do this kind of thing. And of course, it's always written by an inside think tanker, junior think tanker, in some colonel or general from the Air Force or something like that, which is the case. And it's interesting how they actually also have to admit that it's very limited, even still having 20,000 troops right now or something. I think 40,000. It could be a number, but no, 10,000. Sorry, but they need at least 50,000 at least, and some plans would think about 150,000. So they admit that if these are not even with the Ford arrival, if these are not the elements, then this is about something else. This is about forcing, in a very comprehensive way, regime change inside Venezuela by several means, but especially try to set up some sort of disruptive attacks that would enable maybe some sort of insurgency, Libya-style. So that they kind of suggested, but the takeaway that's important, not only that, because I've seen that in other papers from different institutions also, it's the fact that they acknowledge risk, and two, they have to force the narrative and say it's going to be easy because of this markers, whatever they are. So that also tells you that how this also it has like that urgency and to justify the viability of it all, and how big this is. Yeah. I mean, how bigger forces are actually operating here.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously why Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize, right? I mean, even though that's a prize that Trump very much wanted for himself, but they have to give it to Machado because they need to make sure success of this operation. And then Machado goes on to openly support military operation against her own country. This is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. I mean, we're living a 1984 here. Peace is war, folks. Nobel Peace Prize owner advocating for war. But that's why she was selected for Nobel Peace Prize in the first place. And I would think I was also looking at the kind of the level of military pivot to Caribbean. Right now, it's mostly naval and air force. So I don't think they are ready at this point for like a ground level invasion. I mean that can get very messy very quickly, and I think also U.S. is going to have some logistic issues to actually be able to transport ships. They just simply don't have those army transport ships that on the scale they have during the Iraq War anymore. Those ships have been mothballed, and so they might be thinking about. This is my guess that they may have been thinking about doing at most either just through intimidation or at most kinetic level doing some kind of the Obama's lead from behind campaign in Libya-style, where they will send in some air force to do some strategic bombing and hopefully to cause some insurgency inside Venezuela to overthrow the Maduro's government. And is that why recently Maduro announced that he was going to distribute rifles throughout the country?
I think those are two different things in that sense. But yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that, and I think, mind you, that at least for a year, over 20 terrorist plot has been foiled by the security agencies here in Venezuela. That tells you something once you see this. From the other hand, and I can quote it, by the way, surely there's this also another report of this lit pro-war, pro-intervention in Venezuela literature that says that basically it's a short one, and it seems like tailored for Trump. Basically, it says that airstrikes on Venezuela to support an insurgency would succeed throughout the whole country except from Caracas. So yeah, it's in the literature in that sense, and also this CASIS report says something about too risky to do short range or mid range attacks, so you have to do long range. So yes, this widens the scope of the covert unconventional approach to this, and if this now you can make both things dialogue, as in you have the terrorist attempts, the infiltrations, and so on, and you have this. It clearly shows that I agree. I mean, I agree with you what you're saying with your assessment, which basically was the same back then, by the way. I mean, it seems more plausible, some sort of airstrikes and maybe also naval, but not a full occupation of sorts. And yes, if it's for regime change, they need this proxy force, which of course Maria Corina Machado has been that proxy throughout her whole life, throughout her whole political life, and so. And then you have another thing, which is Trump declaring that he authorized CIA covert operations against Venezuela. I mean, which is I mean, it's pretty. It's pretty obvious. Covert operations have been going on already. So this is about something else. Of course, this is not about saying that now they're starting, but there are clear proofs of this. I mean, recently they tried to get to the president's pilot in order to, and they were trying to bribe him in order to make him say, move course and fly the plane into Miami or something and get our president arrested. So yeah, there are clear signs. What I mean, there are clear signs of trying to disrupt internally, in sabotage or infiltrating some sort of terrorist groups and try to bring about some sort of insurgency. But the important thing, Carl, also, which is also I think one of the most important takeaways of the Venezuelan situation right now, is that nothing of that. It's not only working. People aren't still, after 2 months of this, freaked out about this. There's no collapse. There's no major breakdown of the society. There's no actual insurgency brewing. You don't feel like an insurrectional atmosphere going on. You don't see, other than on social media and media outside of Venezuela, you don't see that here. People, first of all, people are uninterested in supporting this kind of things, and that's a big. Every poll shows big numbers regarding this. I mean, there's a minority and there's also a majority in the social media landscape, which are many diaspora Venezuelans actually supporting this, and there are people who also supports, but they're a minority ones one time. Not even back in 2019, 2020 with Guaido, there was a bigger, stronger consensus than the one there is right now. And I'm including there Venezuelan opposition politicians, more of the rational factions of the opposition, who also condemn and do not agree with a U.S. intervention in order to bring about regime change. So that's important. I mean, you have that level of resistance, which involves the military aspects and the national mobilization aspect of people, joining the militias, training, and doing drills. Not only military drills, but also disaster relief drills, and also at the same time national consultations, national commune consultations, which are direct elections for projects on local needs, infrastructure or health or anything that a commune that's organizing, that's going to be a communal circuit. It's a sum of communes are going to decide where are they going to allocate a budget. There's a big one coming in the 23rd. So these are also the ways to resist and also to show that this kind of unimpressive for Venezuelans in that sense, it's not working still. I think the only one that's go on.
That actually leads to my next question: is what is the sentiment on the street level right now in Caracas? Are people worried about this? Is it tense? Is this do people constantly talking about this every day, or is everybody just still going through their normal routine lives? What's it like?
I mean, everyone is about their business, man. I mean, that's one thing. The question can come up, and it could take any direction during the conversation. Mostly people don't want it, but most people are focused on getting money, and just keep it up with your life and your livelihood, and especially now because this is also sociological and cultural aspect. This is the end. We already started the end of the year. The holiday spirit and so on, which is very intense in Venezuela. Actually, our president declared that Christmas started on October already. But that actually as you get closer to December, it gets intensified. And people are actually mostly focused on that and to make, and go beyond ends meet and be able to, have the traditional party in Venezuelan, the Christmas style, And that's actually the main baseline you're going to see anywhere in the country. So that's, for me, it's the biggest measure of this. Of course, there might be fear, there might be concern that the situation could change also. I mean, we're talking now, and one more time, it was quite different when we were talking 2 months ago. So who knows, even a week from now, This week actually has felt now as a perceptive sensorial element, as a very slow one regarding the previous ones, as how intense the ones that we're actually following this feel about that, which is not necessarily what common people on the streets feel about this. But given the movements, it has been different. I mean, it's like, I don't know if it's the eye of the hurricane. I don't know if it's fizzling out in some ways. I don't know if there are new actual internal contradictions regarding what to do. There's some weird stuff going on. I don't know if you saw, but allegedly, the Brits are not sharing more intelligence with the U.S. on the Caribbean, which was used to be a common thing regarding drug dealing, drug trafficking, and smuggling. And of course, they have also a heavy, very Britishly discreet presence in the Caribbean. And so they say this. I mean, and it's not that they say it. It was reported by CNN, and there was no 10 Downing Street official denying it. So that's weird. 2 weeks ago, also, there was some weird pushback Marco Rubio had to scold some scoops by Miami Herald and saying that these were fake news, it was a lie, and you based the whole report on a lie or whatnot. But that could also mean that he was doing damage control, for example, because he was the one who leaked the neocon style, Florida neocon style, which always have like a stint of Gloria Estefan to it, or was it some pushback from some liberal section of spook world, U.S. empire spook world, or Five Eye, I don't know. So those are that there are all these things moving, and they are also maybe having an actual influence, if all what we're saying is true, because there also has been an insane amount of spin. I mean, and it has got ingrained in many reports. For example, one was from the New York Times regarding Venezuela was willing to, cut off all the deals with China, Iran, and Russia, and give all that access to the U.S. in order to stop this. That's absolutely false. Then the Atlantic was saying that Maduro was negotiating something like to bail out of power, and also an immunity for him and his quote unquote cronies to live a golden exile somewhere and leave the country alone or something, which is also spin. So you also have to deal with that layer of all this. It's too much, man. It's crazy how much is going on.
Yeah, that's active propaganda. I mean, that's agitprop. Agitprop.
It's agitprop. Yes, it's agitprop. Yeah, exactly.
Designed to spread disinformation and destabilize. this lead me to the next question. But before that, not many people might even know there's British military presence in the Caribbean.
Exactly.
I was actually surprised when I traveled to Belize in like around 2004, and when I saw British military presence in Belize, and then I realized, okay, the Brits hasn't really left their colonies. But what is the attitude of other Latin American countries toward this?
By the way, regarding the previous one, not only the Brits but the French and the Dutch as well. This is, I mean, the Caribbean has also like an Article 5 territory kind of things, regarding the NATO. But other countries, I think, for example, Trinidad has gone like in a very roller coaster mood because there have been many people have been disturbed and upset with what it's going on a social political level, and also a humane one. I mean, some of their fellow countrymen has been killed, and they state they're not involved in any of this kind of criminal activity. So that, I think, has had an important pushback in Trinidad. I don't know how far, and that doesn't mean that the government is stopping, because it has become a very proactive one. Sadly, the one from Trinidad and Tobago, which is I don't know, it's from northeastern Venezuela to Trinidad. It's like, I think it's like 40 nautical miles. I mean, it's very, very close. I might be mistaken, but it's a very, very short distance between Venezuela and Trinidad. That's why Trinidad is also part of the equation, just as Guyana. And they've also tried to push Grenada to allow the U.S. to set up a radar station there, without overly stating it's for Venezuela. But of course it is. It's 100 nautical miles or something, from Grenada to Venezuela. So there's a lot of pushing and shoving and driving with the Caribbean countries, but the mood is different. I mean, Barbados is against this. Jamaica has also said something milder. Antigua and Barbuda has also been against it. They condemn it. They actually, the case of, for example, Martinica, they offer themselves to mediate in the situation, because this is undermining the peace declaration from 2012 throughout the region, and also the Tlatelolco declaration from the late 60s, which declares that no nuclear weapons should be in the Western Hemisphere, in the Caribbean and South America. Then you have Colombia right now. Yes.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I was gonna ask about the other big Latin American countries, but
exactly.
There, so go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, the Caribbean is important in this, and it's crazy how important it actually is, regardless how quote unquote small it is. I mean, it's highly strategic. That's why there's so many people and in the Caribbean currently, of course. And also, well, and then you have Colombia now, which clearly there's a shift there because of the government it has, and there must be also the mood. It's not. I don't think it's unified in one specific direction right now. Maybe some people are worried because Petro's getting them into trouble or not. There are elections coming next year, so that's also quite. Well, I don't know how fragile it is or how successful it's going to be. The successor of Petro, which is Ivan Cepeda, a far more talented and intelligent guy, by the way. I'm not saying Petro is stupid, but I mean, this guy is even smarter. So that also, I don't know what could happen there, but Colombia could be a pivoting element, whatever happens with these elections, or if a coup ensues or something. But officially, it's against. Of course, it's supporting Venezuela, and it's nice also to see how the Bolivarian spirit, which is also very important here, about nationalism, about actual nationalism that maybe many people in the West basically don't understand, also has a saying here. And Colombia seems to like finally manifesting it after a very long sleep, And then you have players like Ecuador or Argentina, which is even more crazy.
Just on the Colombian thing, I think some of my English audience might not understand. This is United States is bringing back the Grand Colombia, the vision of Simon Bolivar, right?
Yes. Exactly.
Because Colombia and Venezuela used to be one country under Simon Bolivar, and U.S. through its aggressive policies to both Colombia and Venezuela is finally bringing back the Grand Colombia back together. But yeah,
man, yeah, great remark, man. That was important, and that's exactly it. I mean, it kind of like blowback is going to bring. We could bring wonderful things for us and very bad things for them in that sense. Well, who knows? I mean, that's actually a possibility. I mean, it runs. It has. There's a deeper layer in this, and it's going to be able to, if we go through this and we're able to to overcome it, something new will happen in that sense, I think. And it has to do with that. It has to do with that history, which is a whole different subject. You have Brazil also, which is a big player, but it's quite lukewarm, but they also condemn this. And you have Argentina on the other side, which with Milei up front, and I mean, it's now a BlackRock Zionist colony currently. And they're very proactive on the other side. Marco Rubio, at the early stages, tried to create some sort of coalition of the willing, bringing over Argentina, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and some Central American countries like Panama, of course, the Panama Canal, and what we saw regionally regarding China as well, of course, and China and BlackRock, by the way. I mean, so that's how intense this is.
Yeah, China just rejected the deal for BlackRock to take over the canal ports because
exactly.
those canal the ports on both sides of the canal were operated by a Hong Kong company, Hutchinson Whampoa, and the United States have been put a lot of pressure on the billionaire owner of Hutchinson Whampoa, Li Ka-shing, to sell it to BlackRock. That deal almost went through, and then finally Chinese government put its foot down. It's like, no, listen to us. You might be a billionaire, you might own those companies, but we're gonna make the call. You are not gonna sell it to BlackRock. Otherwise, all your business in China are gonna be blacklisted. So so China vetoed that deal, and this is because they understand the reason U.S. want control of those Panamanian ports is because then U.S. will have a veto on China's trade with Latin America. I mean, that's a whole point. That's why they're crying about Chinese influence in Latin America. They want to curtail it, and this is why Trump wants to put a tariff on any goods coming out of the Chancay port in Peru because China helped build that port. Yeah. This again, this all goes back to the Neo-Monroe Doctrine strategy, trying to preserve the West Hemisphere for exclusive U.S. influence. And
regarding that, if we go even further in that, regarding the Monroe Doctrine, it's even more like the Roosevelt corollary. This is the one that's being deepened, and also. Because the Monroe Doctrine, of course, by James Monroe, 1823, and so forth, America for the Americans, basically, which is not allowing any of the European powers to have a bigger influence in the hemispheric affairs. Of course, with a thin veiled declaration saying like, "Well, we're all friends now. Aren't we all friends?" That kind of approach. But there's this extension to it, which is the Roosevelt corollary from Theodore Roosevelt, which basically says something like, but if any country is unable to behave and able to sort out their own business, we have the right to sort it out ourselves. So this also, in the historical area, it's like a big comeback of Rooseveltian politics, not only in the region, because of course, but also worldwide.
I would argue it's Roosevelt politic with a twist, because Roosevelt is famously saying, speak softly but carry a giant stick. What the Trump administration is doing right now is talk very loudly and carrying an increasingly diminishing stick. That is a difference with Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes, well, there are 100 years difference. There's, first as a tragedy and then as a farce. I mean, it stands here just as perfectly. It fits nicely because and also regarding Panama in the middle of this, and Roosevelt and all we're talking about is, if Panama was basically set as independent from Colombia after the Thousand Wars Day on a USS ship. I forgot the name, but the document was written by J.P. Morgan. So that kind of and it is that approach, and it also has some resonances with filibustering, the antebellum stuff, more of the manifest destiny moment from the U.S. It also shows how intertwined all this is. All these dynamics are
Yeah.
there as alive as they were 100 years from now. They were just dormant in a sense.
So, what is the attitude of Brazil? Brazil is one of the biggest countries in Latin America, and for some odd reason, Brazil has some kind of testy relationship with the government of Venezuela.
Yeah,
What is the
yeah.
current stance during this confrontation?
No, it's a very principled one up to this point. You know, up to this point, it's a principled one. Lula tried to offer himself to mediate between the U.S. and Venezuela. That didn't go too well. They are, of course, they also condemn the means and the extrajudicial killings and so forth. But I don't know. They can always. The problem with Brazil now, from my point of view, of course, is that they can always go further and be more decisive in their action, and they don't. They don't do that. Some people will usually blame Itamaraty, which is how they call the foreign ministry, which is a very, very powerful entity in Brazilian politics in general, and of course, obviously on the foreign policy. It has been Itamaraty's insiders the one that actually prevented Venezuela and Nicaragua to join BRICS, to become BRICS observers in Kazan a year ago, in 2024, October 2024 or November, somewhere around that date. So, and it's contradictory. And also, they were very, very close to the Democrats. That was also a big problem. And you have also Celso Amorim, which is the advisor, one of the main advisors of Lula, who was back in the day, he was Minister of Defense and also was a foreign minister also, who by now I don't know if something has actually changed or this has been his true colors all the time. But for example, he has been quite vocal about, yeah, we use BRICS, but we will use BRICS to put pressure and to put a balance to the G20, which is our source of inspiration. And I'm quoting here. The last words are, I mean, they're verbatim. That's what he said. So you have that
That
liberal
that
problem there.
that's a sense I got when I was talking with a Brazilian journalist Pepe Escobar. I asked him,
Yeah.
what's the deal between Brazil and Venezuela, and he was telling me it's not Lula, it's the people in Lula's government that's really trying to put a damper on the relationship, because they're still a very strong kind of liberal wing of
Yeah.
in the Brazilian government that lean toward United States. Despite, but that might change. But he at that time we spoke before the close the tariff, but he said that might change because of tariff war and all that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and Pepe's right. But I would add, to some extent, when it when it ends to be the Itamara people, and when it starts to be actually Lula, the one actually using these people to do this. I mean, it's just a question. I mean, I'm not saying I know, but I do bring that question as well into this. And yeah, not only pro-US in that sense, but also liberal Democrat kind of, uh, proximity. And these are part of the result. And you also have the Brazilian left, which involves some, I think, so it may or might be heretical about what I'm saying, but from a nationalist popular stand of the very strong third worldish communist party with experience in World War II, by the way, fighting fascism, and also in the French resistance, there was a very strong Brazilian component. So it's not just a simple woke-ish left. It has also Christian elements and so on, and that's actually the alliance that would create the PT afterwards, during the dictatorship years and so on. And suddenly it became more like an academic, woke, liberal kind of left in places of power that are important. But also, you you can't be as that mean with Brazil after what they went through with all the lawfare chapter. It was insanely destructive of the Brazilian uh, power projection and smart power projection. It really they hit him really they hit Brazil really hard in that moment, and they were able to roll back a lot of Brazil's strength. And I think they even have the Lula governments have, and the PT movement hasn't recovered completely from those blows because they were really hard. I mean, they barely made it back, which is good, of course. But also, so they have to. What I'm trying to say here is that it is for them. It's a very complex situation in also the correlation of strength. It's complicated. I mean, they also have very strong players. But one more time, Carl, I think if something kinetic actually happens, some outliers are going to happen as well in Brazil and other places. I mean, they're going to be afraid, freak out, react in some way or another. I can't predict, but it's not going to be predictable. That's not for us or for them. For them, I'm saying the United States in this sense. And that's a common fit to all of these countries. The other one, which is very important to like finish the whole tour, I guess, it's Mexico. Mexico, yes. Which is also in a very vulnerable situation because of, I mean, like for the famous Porfirio Diaz quote, Porfirio Diaz, the long-standing dictator in the late 19th century, early 20s, would say, "Poor Mexico, so far from God, and too close, and so close to the United States." So
yeah.
But they also have a government that has been quite nationalistic, and also they have since López Obrador, before Claudia Sheinbaum, the current president, it has taken a very interesting drive and regarding sovereignty, regarding their own Estrada Doctrine, which is a very dynamic pro-hemispheric, non-interventionist foreign policy, and this also has helped out also to reshape pressure points to many countries, and also the complexities that they're faced now inside the government. But I think Sheinbaum has been very smart, very clever, and very graceful the way she's been playing this crazy-ass tango with the United States. But they're also at the crosshair. I mean, many people, and this brings us back to the start of this, Carl, they ruled out Mexico, and they thought Venezuela might be better as a win regarding the whole narco narrative, That also explains that, because many people were actually more interested in engaging militarily with the cartels, allegedly, inside Mexico. But they said it was going to be even more costly than a Venezuelan intervention. And the Venezuelan intervention being costly also obeys, and we can go back once again to the first question, to the elements that were at play at that moment. You don't have a win with China. You don't have a win with Russia, Ukraine. You don't have a complete win regarding Gaza or Iran in that sense. And you don't have an Epstein win either. You have also not enough domestic wins, and you just lost an election, by the way, or not lost an election, but I'm losing the word. I mean, the prefabricated U.S. word for this, but it sounded the alarm, the Mandani thing, which is not that relevant, but the Democrats
the New York election.
So all those things are also operating there. So they thought Venezuela could be an easy win. It also reminds you of that Michael Ledeen quote, the famous one. The early neocon, that sometimes the U.S. has to push around, or something like that, push around a little country and show the world who's boss, which is also a very bad analytical mistake, which I think has to bring another crazy element to the whole equation, Carl, and because there are very strong similarities between the two structurally, which is Nigeria in this moment. Venezuela, it's drugs and terrorism, the merging of those paradigms. In the case of Nigeria, supposedly it's the Christian massacres by Boko Haram or other Takfiri, narco-Islamic outfits.
And it just so happens in both places, China has placed a lot of investment, and both
exactly.
cases that U.S. was freaking out about those Chinese investments.
So
exactly. Now suddenly, United States need to do protect and serve, and in both places. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you have, and also, I mean, Nigeria as Venezuela are both petrostates. They have very similar buildup, and how and historical evolution, regardless of the also very different ones, even in size. I mean, they're like almost the same size. Also, I think Venezuela is a bit larger, but it's like quite obscene and obvious. There are other elements, for example, which also relates to Venezuela's recovery also. But I'm talking about Nigeria as a way to explain it. You have this guy Dangote, this very powerful billionaire that had just built the refinery. It's the first time Nigeria is actually refining their own crude for their own consumption ever. Those are independent, very independent moves. But in this case, by a very nationalist businessman who knows that, well, he can keep up with his nationalist feelings, at the same time make a lot of good money. And that is also a problem there, I think. And you have another layer to this, which is also geopolitical, I think, which is the Muslims in Nigeria are the northern Nigerians, right? Like the Hausa predominantly. And what do you have at the other side of the border? You have Niger, and you have the Sahel, and you have the Hausas at the other part of the border. So it goes in many directions with the same purpose, I might add, And because based on very inaccurate, bogus reasons, yes, Boko Haram is killing Christians, but also it's killing Shias. It is also killing and also Sunni. They're killing everyone. So it's not
the Boko Haram and IS situation in the whole Sahel region is caused by United States when they overthrew Gaddafi.
In the first time.
There's all these. They supported all these terrorists to overthrow jihadi, and then all these terrorists got their hands on all the web arsenals of Libya, and then flooded into the Sahel region. And now suddenly, the whole Sahel region is destabilized, and suddenly the U.S. and French military have more reasons to deploy there to serve and protect. The cycle just goes on.
And now this brings back another colorful element to this. We're talking about Wahhabism, fundamentalism, Al Qaeda, right? And now you have
former head of Al Qaeda Syria just met Trump in the White House. This guy had a $10 million bounty on him as late as last year.
Yeah, exactly. And the funny thing is that Pete Hegseth, the war secretary, reality showman, says that the narco-terrorists are the new Al Qaeda, and we're going to kill you, and we're going to hunt you down, and America, fuck yeah, and FAO and everything. And at the same time, they're receiving the actual thing, the actual guy at the Oval Office. I mean, it's just insane, because another easy conclusion is that this is not even post-truth. This is just fuck you reality. This is nihilism at its best, and nothing matters any more than the urgent need to face decline, the threats of decline. And that's also part of it, which also has, like, this all shows a very cognitive decline going on at the same time within empire, and how they see things and how they conceive the solutions. And there's no other more dangerous element of decline than the Chinese presence in the Caribbean, and the multipolar presence in general. And that's why they have to rebuild I'm just going to say one more time, and say this all the time in each and every interview, the hemispheric wall. Push out all these players, and reshore and rebring all the industry and the capitals and whatnot, in order to be able to survive. To survive, basically, as the entity they think they are right now.
I mean, in order to survive, in order for the American primacy to survive, I mean, average American can still survive without an empire, not a problem.
Exactly, precisely.
Just like the British after the giving up the British Empire, average American can also survive and have good life. But for the military-industrial complex to survive, they must have primacy. They must pivot from one war to another, and the perpetual war must go on. And I think they just think to pick Venezuela because they thought Venezuela might be a low-hanging fruit, because that's
Exactly.
Trump. That's what Trump liked to do. Trump liked to pick low-hanging fruit, but I think this time they will find themselves pick a rock instead. I mean, it's not.
I think
Venezuela
so.
is not a low-hanging apple. It's a rock. It's a granite. They're gonna kick it and then hurt their feet. I think that's what's gonna happen.
Yeah, hopefully, hopefully. And then I think, to sum it all up, it brings another dimensional layer, which is because the Gaza paradigm, it's operating in the Western Hemisphere to a different level, not only on the obvious, as in the insanely low value of life, of human life, and the legal implications of it. They called all the sea people who have been killed in speedboats and the small boats. They call it unprivileged belligerents. I mean, you don't have you're nothing, and you're basically
This is just a cover. This is just a cover for very illegality of U.S. Navy killing people, because this is not legal anywhere. U.S. This is, I mean, even if we accept their narrative, these are drug smuggling boats, which are bogus. It's U.S. Navy Coast Guard's job to intercept those boats coming into the U.S. waters. It's not U.S. Navy's job going to other people's waters or international waters to kill people. That's there's no laws that allows for that kind of thing. So
no. And the other thing, which is, I think it's also as dangerous, regarding Gaza and regarding Lebanon and regarding Israel in that sense also, it's now how this all high-tech stuff and how this surveillance stuff is also being used here, as in the tech bros also taking up their own share of this situation. It's not hard, to imagine where the objective banks have been, or how they're being organized, how they're being analyzed, how the information is being picked up in order to quote unquote plan what they're going to do, or these attacks or whatever. I mean, and then there's another obvious reason, just like Exxon and other people, which is these oligarchs need as much energy as possible in order to keep the edge on wherever they're actually able to keep the edge regarding AI and so on. And also, of course, population control. This has to do with that as well, Carl. It's like the final layer of this.
I think that you might hit the nail on the head there, because all the Silicon Valley tech bro who essentially took over the White House with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and these guys, Palantir, which is basically embedded in the U.S. government right now, they are designing AI weapons for U.S. to wage war. So they're fully embedded. Yeah, they're part of the military-industrial complex now. It's not just military-industrial complex. It's the Mickey Mouse, the military, intelligence, industrial, academic, congressional complex, and they all have a vested interest to grow the AI bubble, which means to feed the AI bubble, they need to build more data centers, and those data center needs to feed a lot and lots of energy. And where those energy is going to come from? And Trump has already decided, we're going to ditch the whole renewable thing. We're just going to go full hydrocarbons. That means U.S. must get its hands on all the hydrocarbon resources in its hemisphere. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserve, and it just so happens that Venezuelan crude matches perfectly to the U.S. refineries in the southern coast, and they can afford to have those Venezuelan crude go to China. That's, for them, it's a zero-sum mentality. If China gets her hands on Venezuelan oil, that's less oil for U.S. So we can't have that.
No, absolutely. I mean, and you also said something that people are not that aware of, but there's a huge and very important refining circuit in central southern U.S. that relies exclusively on Venezuelan heavy crude. So you do have that. I mean, you can't. It's not like we're just gonna substitute it with something else. We're just gonna do something else. You can't. It's exclusively designed for this. So yeah, I mean, and also think this is like the bad term situation with us. But think about what had just happened in what's already going on in Bolivia, in Argentina, and what just happened in Bolivia with the electoral defeat of the mass movement in government. This is about lithium, and it's also about pushing, pushing out the Chinese and the Russians and any other player that's not the U.S. because the northern triangle there, the triangle there between the lithium triangle between Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia is like the biggest deposits, at least with not the nearest ones, at least. So that's also part of the reshaping, but they can do that by other means: electoral defeat, complete and full control of the government. We're just placing a lunatic at its helm and just bailing him out as much as they need. So it's the same, and it's the same threat, the same rationale, and the same purpose.
But I would say U.S. is fighting a a battle of reaction. They're lashing out because they see what they see as a pink washing of Latin America. Always all these leftist government popping up everywhere from Mexico to Colombia, all these traditional U.S. allies, quote unquote, and then this is why they must pop up Millie and must give him $40 billion because that's one of the last poster child for U.S. liberalism and for Zionism. So they must not let Millie fail. But I think this is an ongoing thing, of course. But I think overall, U.S. is fighting a lot. They're fighting the tide of the history, the progress, the train of progress, because there's Latin America has such long history with United States, and they're frankly sick and tired of it.
Absolutely. And I was thinking, now you mentioned all this, I was thinking something else. Rubio in his reports, especially the Made in China 2025 reports, the one he did in 2018 and the one last year, 9 years later, when he even admits there are several of the 12 strategic areas that he focuses on, the 12 strategic areas of the Made in China 2025. And he already admits, and in some it's irreversible. In some they're lagging behind, and in some of this they still keep some of the edge. But the funny thing is, and it's something that repeats itself in several articles and his last book, the most recent book, and also on law and pieces of legislation, is that this loss of edge, this losing of the edge, we're going to bring, if we don't do something, we're going to have a century of humiliation. He exactly uses it that way. I mean, of course, Global Times picked it up at some point and said Marco Rubio. The heading was like, Marco Rubio is a political weirdo, because of because of framing it in that sense.
You know what? I think the United States needs its own century of humiliation to counteract some of that hubris. I mean, because right now it's because U.S. still it's full of hubris. It cannot see its own shortcomings and the problems. That's why it keep on lashing out at the world. Now, with a real century of humiliation, that might finally bring on some self-reflection by its elite. Maybe they should exactly
serve it, and that's it. That's true. You're right about that. Completely right.
Yeah,
and I mean it's and very well earned, by the way. It didn't have to happen this way, But that's the thing about hubris, like you just said.
it's self-inflicted. A lot of the U.S. internal problem is all self-inflicted. And the thing is, right now the empire is coming home to roost. The way that U.S. used to treat people of Latin America, now the U.S. elite is treating their own citizens the same way. That the U.S. elite is looking at the average people of U.S. also as the resource for raw material for resource extraction to extract to the 1%. So they
Yeah,
yeah.
it's colonialism 101. I mean, and if you it's always a very seminal document with what Aimé Césaire, Martinican poet and writer wrote back in, I think it was the 50s. It's called Discourse on Colonialism, which one of the most important premises was it was all right as long as Hitler was in, Southwest Africa or Indochina or China itself or Latin America, wherever. But then it come when suddenly several years afterwards, Hitler was basically knocking your door because that's the same Hitler that was outside, doing what they did. This is the same principle one more time, and based on the same rationale and the same urgencies. So it's devastating how those things actually hold up so strongly, but at the same time it has all this. I mean, we have an hour already, an hour and 15 minutes of complexities to it. I mean, how many kaleidoscopical elements it has to it. Maybe because we're just big nerds on this and we're following each and every nook and cranny we can see, but it shows you how complex it, but at the same way, how devastating simple is all this. And of course, the end, one of the final stages of colonialism is it's self-infliction, it's self-harm, it's what's happening right now.
Yeah, imperialism is what the final stage of capitalism, right? I mean, like we are getting to the very late stage capitalism here in US, and this has been a fascinating conversation. I can geek out on this with you for hours, but I like to respect your time. I definitely would like to have you back because this is an evolving story. The whole
Exactly. Yeah.
U.S. aggression towards
It could be
Venezuela.
completely different. It could be
Yeah,
quite different the next time we just have another talk. It actually
yeah,
is. I mean, it was already. We talked 2 months ago, and now it's very different. And maybe we can get quote Monty Python, and then for something completely different. That could happen so easily.
yeah. Well, well, let's hope for the best, and thank you very much, Diego, for making your time to speak to our audience. And I mean it when I say I very much would like to have you back in not so distant future to continue to discuss the ongoing U.S. aggression toward Venezuela, toward Latin America. Before you go, if people want to follow you on social media, where would they go? Where would they go?
Yeah. First of all, they should visit the site Misión Verdad, MISIONVERDAD.com. Misión Verdad, Truth Mission in Spanish. It's mostly in Spanish, but I think any decent AI translator can translate it quite neatly. Uh, Myself, I'm on Twitter, Diego Seguera. I think that's like the most go-to place, regardless of how inactive I seem to be there. And we also have Misión Verdad has also a Telegram channel. You can look for Misión Verdad, which is also very very active in Spanish most of the time, but it's very useful as well to follow, especially this Hispanosphere, you know. So those are the go-to places.
Well, everyone follow Diego because he's the foremost expert on what's actually going on the ground in Latin America, and we will have him back on the shows very soon. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And until next time, bye bye.